The story of a man who went through a lot: betrayal, divorce, and then having to start dating again in a modern world that's challenging but also full of opportunities. Bob's journey through all the ups and downs of life shows genuine experiences, unique observations, and inspiring moments. One of these was when my wife approached me with a request that I give her permission to cheat on me. I was so shocked that I didn't know how to react. How can you, after 2 years of living together, come up with such statements? All I knew was that a very drastic decision had to be made immediately. I should have seen it coming. Life seemed too good, especially at the time. It was a Friday evening, a lovely summer's day. My Corona was ice cold as I took a sip. The Cubs were doing well against the Cardinals on the big screen, leading 7-2 in the 5th inning. My loyal German Shepherd, Rice, was nestled beside my lazy boy, mostly asleep but occasionally glancing at the TV when I cheered for the Cubs. Apart from the television and my sporadic bursts of excitement, the house was serene. My wife of 21 years, Tracy, was visiting a neighbor while my 18-year-old son is 17 and my old daughter was staying at a friend's house, so it was just me, the dog, the Cubs and a case of Corona in the fridge. I'd grabbed a couple of limes earlier in the day, too. I was treating myself right. I heard the front screen door open and close. I thought it was my wife coming back from visiting her friend Lisa, but I heard movement in the front of the house. She didn't greet me as usual, which struck me as odd. My attention shifted when Cubs manager David Ross made a controversial decision, which made me angry and disturbed the dog. It took at least 5 minutes before Tracy finally came into the family room. She seemed thoughtful, maybe a bit anxious. Instead of coming over for our usual kiss, she sat on the edge of the sofa next to me while keeping one eye on her. I kept watching the game with the other eye. "Can you talk for a minute, Bob?" she asked. Her voice was barely audible over the television, but I heard her clearly. "Of course, Blondie," I replied. I watched her. I noticed a faint layer of perspiration on her forehead and her breathing was irregular. I wondered if someone we knew was unwell or had passed away. "Could you turn off the TV, Bob?" she asked, her fists clenching and unclenching. I understood that her request was important. It had to be something serious, not just illness but death. I felt uneasy. I reached for the remote and turned off the TV. "What's wrong, honey? You don't seem well. Has someone passed away?" I asked. "Oh God, no. Nobody has died," she replied quickly. "It's just that this is incredibly important to me and I need to ensure you're fully attentive." I nodded silently, my mind filled with troubling thoughts. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. Fear was evident in her gaze, along with something else, perhaps anger. "You know I love you completely and I would never betray you, never be unfaithful with another man." Right, this wasn't the question I had anticipated. Suddenly, the dinner I had earlier in the evening and the 2 beers I drank during the game seemed to be. She was threatening to resurface right there on the family room floor. I nodded silently once more. "I'm 45, Bob. Besides you, I've only been with one other man in my entire life," she began. I still turn heads. My friends even call me a hot mill. I want to be with another man just once to experience it. The idea of someone new before we grow old together was really exciting. I couldn't tell how long it was, as though a train was whizzing by my ears. "No, absolutely not," I shouted as I jumped up from my seat. "This won't happen." While I was still breathing, she looked at me with wide eyes as I walked back and forth. It felt like a terrible dream. Maybe I had dozed off in my chair and entered into a nightmare. "This isn't about you and me, Bob. It's about me. My personal needs are more important than you and our family." She spoke up, getting stronger with each word. "I've been a devoted wife and mother for a long time. I've always put the family first, but now I need to do something for myself. I need to feel like a confident, desirable woman in control of my life." "You don't feel desirable with me," I realized, sounding a bit pathetic as I said it. "I express my love for you all the time and I think I make you feel desired." I still crave you and I don't think I'm subtle about it. You do and I appreciate that, but this is about something else. I still crave validation from men other than you, Val. It's gratifying to be noticed by other men. It's exhilarating to imagine that another man desires me in that way. Don't you feel good when you catch a woman looking at you or flirting with you? I'm not unlike anyone else. I enjoy being looked at and desired. After all this time, I desire no more than that. I yearn for the experience of going out on a date, being treated to dinner and wine, and then being pursued and desired by a different man just for one night. Not love, just desire. One night, I would return home to you and be yours. I would be a devoted wife and mother for the rest of my days. You're far from just a devoted wife and mother to me. Blondie, I countered. You're my everything. I can't bear the thought of you being with another man. I refuse to let you go to another. You keep saying you love me. Why not show it by letting me have this? I know it's a lot to ask. It's probably the biggest ask of all. It would mean a lot to me if you were to agree. She insisted, no, it would be foolish for me to agree to that. If you truly love me, you wouldn't have even brought it up. I replied, I've been a good husband and father to our children. Shouldn't that earn me some leeway? You had more partners than I did before we got married. I'm just trying to be fair. She reasoned that they'd never discussed numbers before marriage. They'd only talked about fidelity after marriage. She also said that she'd only been intimate with 4 women in her life, including him. He explained that he'd assumed she had more experience than him. She admitted that he seemed to know more than her. She'd done a lot of reading on the subject. She wanted to make him happy in every way. She was still firmly against it. I'm not just against it, I'm actually going to be contacting a lawyer first thing on Monday morning to begin divorce proceedings. I could see the shock on her face, but she stuttered, I understand this must have been difficult for you to ask for, which tells me you're serious about it. That also tells me you won't give up easily. I'm sorry, but I've been cheating on you. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I do want you to understand why I've been doing it. I've been eyeing you up, and I've been avoiding eye contact. I think you know what I'm talking about. Are you really willing to tear apart our family, even though I haven't done anything yet? I'm asking because I want to know if you've been thinking about this for a while. It seems like you already have someone in mind. Maybe he's been involved in the planning of lunches and dinners. You've already betrayed me. Who is he? I asked. I didn't have anyone specific in mind. She replied, her gaze fixed on a spot on the wall behind me. The silence stretched for about 15 seconds as I looked at her intently. She flushed crimson when she met my gaze. My eyes registered my disbelief. You don't need to know, Bob, she murmured. Technically, I don't, but I'm curious about the man who's dismantling what I thought was a strong marriage. She paused, then added, you can tell me, or I can reach out to all your close friends, your boss, and every coworker. She was amazed. You wouldn't, she began. I wouldn't. She paused, then added, what do I have left to lose? My life's already in shambles. My marriage is shattered. She looked a little embarrassed, but she quickly added, what about my embarrassment? I made an effort I asked her to keep his name a secret. She told me it was Dan Wilson. I told her not to hurt him. I didn't make any promises. I picked up the remote and started watching the game again. She got up from the couch and went upstairs to our bedroom. I stayed where I was. I was glued to the Cubs game, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't remember what aired on TV after that, but I stayed in front of the screen for at least another 2 hours, despite trying to hide my feelings from my wife. The truth was, I felt utterly devastated. I had no idea that she was thinking about being unfaithful. Looking back, I realized I should have noticed signs of her discontent with me or our life together over the past 3 months. Tracy had grown increasingly distant, not only from me but also from our children. In fact, it was our daughter who first noticed it. Sherry, who'd first spotted it, asked if Tracy and I had been in some sort of disagreement. The closeness between us seemed to have diminished. I observed our frequency of sexual intimacy, which used to be 2 or 3 times a week, had decreased to once every other week despite my efforts. I began to wonder if she might be experiencing some early changes. Furthermore, there were instances of her taking phone calls outside of the room, which was a new behavior, along with nearly constant late-night texting. When I asked about it, she attributed it to Lisa, who supposedly was dealing with issues in her marriage. I was intrigued by the fact that Jerry and Lisa lived just 3 doors down from us. I had no idea they were having problems over the weekend. I thought about my options and told Tracy I was going to start divorce proceedings. But before I did, I needed to think about every aspect of my marriage and family. I could see why other men were attracted to Tracy. I first met her when we were both 21. Even at 45, she had only gained 10 pounds despite having 2 children. She still had an attractive figure. She had a great figure, with big breasts and a firm buttock, and she looked younger than her 45 years. I often thought about how I ended up with Tracy, because she was clearly out of my league. I'm not unattractive, standing at 5 feet 11 inches and weighing 175 pounds, but men like me don't typically. I ended up with someone who was the prom queen just 3 years prior in high school. We met in an astronomy class at Purdue University during our junior year, while I was taking it for fun. Tracy needed it to fulfill her science requirement, while I was more than happy to help her out. I was happy to help her pass the class, even though science wasn't her strong point. By the end of the first semester, we were studying in my dorm room when Tracy suddenly leaned in and kissed me passionately. I kissed her back just as passionately. For most of the semester, I thought you were gay. After we broke the kiss, Tracy said, "No matter what I did, you never seemed interested." I replied, I was definitely interested, but I had no clue it was mutual. I was just trying my best not to drool over you. We immediately entered into an exclusive relationship. It was my best experience. It was a bit limited, but it seemed to be even more important to her. She never complained and seemed to enjoy everything I tried, even the bad stuff. Thanks to my extensive reading on the subject, while my peers were interested in adult films, I studied the depicted actions. This proved useful to Tracy from the very beginning. During our second lovemaking session, I was able to make her lose consciousness with my language technique. When she regained consciousness 2 minutes later, all she could say was, "I love you, Bob." 2 years after we graduated, we got married. 3 years later, our son was born. We were doing well financially thanks to our daughter. I worked and she was a banker. When she returned to work after our youngest started school, our son was preparing to start his freshman year in Ohio State in a couple of months, while our daughter was about to enter her senior year of high school. In just 2 years, we would be empty nesters. We've been talking about our future plans, including travel, for the past few months. I had been in love with this woman for nearly 23 years. On the one hand, ending it all because she requested permission to cheat seemed overly severe, but on the other hand, her asking was a big deal for me. I wasn't naive. I knew that if she was desperate enough to ask to cheat, she might do it behind my back. She told me about it and didn't think it was cheating. But there was also the issue of her already having an emotional affair with Dan Wilson. She was planning to cheat with him physically. Could I ever forgive her? I called a divorce lawyer on Monday morning and made an appointment for Thursday afternoon. In the meantime, Tracy tried to convince me not to file for divorce. They said, "We haven't done anything, Bob. We won't." Tracy asked, "Is it because you genuinely don't want a divorce or because you know it's wrong?" I asked, and she avoided our contact and remained silent. "You're still hoping I'll change my mind and allow it, aren't you?" Her hopeful expression sadly confirmed what we already knew. A week after meeting with the lawyer, I served her with divorce papers. We lived in a no-fault state and had similar incomes. The children were nearly grown, so arrangements would be made gradually with a non-custodial parent. The plan was for the parent with custody to be responsible for child support for a year. We were going to sell the house and divide the proceeds, and then wrap up our 21-year marriage. Despite being married for a year, things didn't go as smoothly as we'd hoped. Tracy hired a lawyer who convinced the judge to order 4 counseling sessions, with the possibility of more if needed. The counselor was a woman in her mid. My children and Tracy were in their 30s and shared the same view as me. If my wife hadn't cheated on me, why did I want a divorce? I told the counselor that I felt her decision to have an affair was wrong. This meant that I no longer felt I could trust her as my spouse, though I may still have some love for her. I couldn't remain married to someone I couldn't trust, but I won't ever entertain such an idea again. Bob, I only need you, please. Ed said this repeatedly throughout. After 2 sessions of counseling, the counselor said, "It's clear you're set on getting a divorce, Mr. Rasmussen. You seem relaxed about it. I'll stop trying to persuade you otherwise. I don't think you're making the right decision. My opinion doesn't matter, but I do think you're making a mistake. Your wife hasn't been unfaithful, so marriage counseling could help you salvage your marriage. Your wife seems willing to make any concessions necessary to save your marriage and your family." Dr. Baker suggested that I admit that I still have strong feelings for Tracy. This decision wasn't made lightly. Dr. Baker, there's a difference in our views. You called it a concession, but I don't see your commitment to fidelity as such. It's about honoring the vows we exchanged 21 years ago. Vows she helped another man violate. I clarified the news of our divorce and my in-laws were. The next day, Tracy told them that my mother-in-law had informed her that the laws were in a frenzy. My lawyer called and went on for about 15 minutes, starting as soon as I answered my father-in-law's call. My wife's usually calm and collected voice was suddenly interrupted by her continued shouting. "She never even betrayed you, and you're ending it after 21 years. Are you out of your mind?" He bellowed. I recounted the sequence of events to him, and throughout I could discern his stifled reactions. Occasionally he would interject with a subdued "really," before I resumed. By the end of our conversation, he appeared diminished in spirit with a final apology. He quietly ended the call. The following week, I relocated to a nearby 2-bedroom apartment. I moved into a bedroom apartment while my daughter chose to stay with my wife until she started college the following year. I thought the extra room might be useful if either of the kids wanted to stay over, despite understanding my reasons for divorcing their mother. Both children were upset with me a few days after moving in. I had a cordial phone chat with my neighbor Jerry. I let him know that his wife Lisa seemed to have played a role in my wife's plans with Dan Wilson, and Tracy had mentioned that there were issues between Jerry and Lisa. I assured Jerry that I didn't suspect him of being involved in the breakdown of my marriage, but it seemed like Lisa might have had a hand in it given Lisa's closeness to Tracy. I told Jerry that I didn't think he was involved in my marriage breakdown, but it seemed like Lisa might have had a hand in it, given their closeness. I couldn't help but wonder if she was also arranging something with another man. "Oh damn," Jerry muttered on the phone. "So you're saying I might be in trouble too? Does your lawyer offer group discounts?" The rise of social media has its pros and cons. For me, a positive was that I could gather plenty of information about Dan Wilson without needing a private investigator, which saved me a lot of money. Wilson, a colleague of Lisa, had moved to our local office from Cleveland around 6 months before my marriage fell apart. He had a beautiful fiancée who was still looking for work in our city, so he frequently traveled. He was trying to set something up with my wife for when he was in town so he could have a warm welcome in both places. I wondered if Tracy was even aware of Wilson's fiancée. That was all in the past now, except for the call I made to Wilson's fiancée, soon after I received word from several sources that Dan's wedding had been called off. His fiancée said he was free to be with his old lady. I should mention that his fiancée was the daughter of a very wealthy man. 2 weeks before my divorce was finalized, I marked my 22nd anniversary with Tracy. I couldn't deny the pain of what I had lost, but as I sat in front of my Swanson TV dinner, I became more convinced that I was making the right choice for myself. If I'd stayed married, I'd have spent the rest of my life wondering if she was being unfaithful. I was sure that she'd find a way to cheat on me. She couldn't stand losing and would see not getting her way as a defeat that needed correcting. I took a sip of single malt and went to bed by 10 p.m., just wanted to wish myself a happy anniversary at about 1 a.m. My phone rang and I realized that my future ex-wife was calling. I thought about transferring the call to voicemail, but I decided to answer because I was already awake. She was moaning and breathing heavily, clearly in the middle of making love. I was familiar with these sounds, so I knew she wasn't faking it despite wanting to hang up. I found I couldn't move while listening to Tracy encouraging her partner, presumably Wilson. I stayed on the line for another 2 minutes, long enough to hear them finish. I wished I had a landline phone so she could hear the phone clap. All my doubts about our impending divorce disappeared at that moment. Following the advice of my lawyer, I had developed a habit of recording all conversations with my wife as I sat there, my nerves on edge. I called my lawyer and asked him to play back the 3-minute recording. I made a 1-minute recording for him before ending the call. I was confident there would be no repeat performances of that unpleasant exchange in the future. Unlike my wife, I didn't seek solace in the company of others until after the divorce was finalized. Even then, it was over a year before I took another woman to bed. I'll admit my social life suffered. It had been 24 years since my last date. With no intention of dating again, I hadn't kept up with I soon realized that I was out of touch with the dating world, which had changed a lot in the meantime. I was afraid of getting hurt again, as I had loved Tracy deeply and her betrayal had blindsided me completely. One noticeable change I observed since my last stint in the dating world was the shift in women's attitudes. Back then, it was typically one-sided. Back then, the man took the lead, choosing who to pursue, asking them out, planning the date and footing the bill. Nowadays, it seems like women are taking on more assertive roles in dating, sometimes initiating the pursuit themselves and having opinions on how the date should unfold. They even occasionally contribute financially at times. I felt like a relic trying to keep up with the pace of modern dating dynamics. The scene showed me that Tracy's sudden selfishness wasn't an exception to the newfound empowerment of women in today's dating scene. They seem to be more focused on satisfying their own desires, sometimes at the expense of their partners. I've encountered this mentality more and more, and it's a recent development that I've witnessed firsthand. I won't complain about the physical side of intimacy with a 20-year-old. I have to say, it was pretty intense at first. I thought I might have strained a couple of muscles, but once I adjusted to the physical demands, the pleasure became incredible. I don't want to describe Tracy's abilities in bed, but at 45, she couldn't match the energy and flexibility of a young woman. I have to admit, I didn't have the stamina of a young man either, but I made up for it with my tongue and finger skills, which were my forte. However, I was not only interested in younger women. I've had partners who were between 25 and 55. I'm open to all ages, but I usually gravitate towards women my age. After a challenging week, I'd go to a new client's meeting in my business suit. I'd stop at the bar of a posh hotel restaurant on a tall stool. I'd order a shot of Glenmorangie single malt. It was around 7, when I arrived at 10 p.m., a lively group of women from a bachelorette party had claimed a cluster of reserved tables. They were exuding quite a bit of energy, so I decided to stay a while longer and enjoy the spectacle. I ordered a meal to be served at the bar. As I expected, the bride-to-be was the center of attention. She was a lovely young woman of around 25, with long brown hair and bright brown eyes. I have a soft spot for long hair, so I spent a few minutes admiring her before turning my attention to the rest of the party. That's when I noticed her. Her counterpart was a woman I guessed to be around 40 years old. She seemed to be the designated chaperone for the evening. The older woman brought along to oversee the younger attendees' behavior. Upon first observation, she appeared somewhat restless in her mid-thigh-length black skirt, which seemed to be. As she sat, her skirt seemed to creep up her legs a few times, but she managed to adjust it each time. I couldn't help but smile. She had attractive legs and a prominent bosom, which was visible beneath her snug lavender silk blouse. Her neckline was low, showing off her pale skin. Her outfit seemed to be aimed at a younger crowd, which was a good choice. I gave her a thumbs up for picking it. The other women looked like they were having fun, laughing and drinking and eating. The band started playing, and a few women got up to dance with each other. This seemed to encourage the other men in the bar to approach the women on the dance floor and those sitting at tables. After waiting for about 10 minutes, I decided it was safe to go over to the chaperone. She was sitting with a dark-haired woman with shoulder-length brown hair. She had hair and bright green eyes, which made her look a bit like Jacqueline Bisset during her prime. What was also pretty significant was that she didn't have a wedding ring on her finger. She blushed a lovely shade of pink when I invited her to dance. She was initially hesitant, but she eventually agreed despite receiving teasing remarks from nearby younger women as she stood up, adjusted her skirt and took my hand. The first 2 dances were lively, and I was silently thanking my ex. After the next dance, which was slow, my wife insisted I learn how to dance. I was pleasantly surprised when Kathleen leaned into me. Her hair carried the scent of white shoulders, which amused me as it's not typically favored by younger women. We engaged in conversation as we moved across the dance floor. Kathleen Frank Ranks, the bride's aunt and group chaperone, thanked me for the dances. She started to leave the dance floor after the slow dance, but I held onto her hand and invited her to join me at the bar. She said she needed to watch her girls, but I pointed out that she could still keep an eye on them from our vantage point at the bar. We watched the younger women and chatted. I found out she was actually 48 years old and had gone through a divorce after a 15-year marriage. After chatting for a while, she told me that her husband was a wealthy man who had replaced her with a younger wife, who was 27 at the time of their marriage. She also mentioned that her attire was chosen by her niece, the bride, and that it was a bit youthful for her usual conservative style. I told her outfit suited her perfectly and that her attractive heels were a great choice. Over the years, I had learned that women often appreciated compliments. She asked me if I looked out of place in this outfit. I told her I didn't think so, but that she looked stunning. We chatted for about 15 minutes. She noticed I wasn't wearing a wedding ring and asked about it. She seemed surprised when I told her about my ex-wife. My wife had never physically cheated on me. I'm quite traditional. I told her she'd betrayed me emotionally and was planning to do so physically. I couldn't trust her anymore. You can't claim to love someone while desiring someone else sexually. She said she understood. A few minutes later, she returned to the bridal party table, but she was still open when I asked her to dance again. About 30 minutes later, this time after we finished, she came back to me. She took my hand and led me back to the table where the other women were sitting. Now, they were joined by several other men. Overall, the evening went well from my perspective, despite the lively behavior of some of the younger women. I was pleased when Kathy asked me to be her date at the wedding in 2 weeks. I had originally planned to attend alone, but I think I'd have a better time with you. Even though we've only just met, you've already made yourself at home. She went on to say that she would be grateful if I could accompany her to the wedding, as she felt it would be a great help to her, as she would otherwise be there alone and might look a little out of place. I told her that I would be delighted to go with her and that I would like to know what color she would be wearing so that I could choose a suit to match. She leaned in and kissed me on the lips, which caused a few people to laugh. From the end of the table, I grinned while Kathy blessed once more. I could definitely get used to that. While not dancing, I sat with Kathy at one point. I found myself keeping a watchful eye on the bachelorette party attendees, some of whom were visibly overindulging in alcohol. Given that I am the father of a teenage girl, it was only natural for me to adopt a protective stance. My attention was drawn when I observed a young man guiding one of the girls towards the restroom. I politely excused myself from the table and swiftly I stepped in and stopped the young man before he could take the girl to the men's restroom. The young man looked at me with disdain. He seemed unimpressed by an older guy in a suit. I'm 5 feet 11 inches and 1,075 pounds, but I don't look intimidating. I'm still in decent shape after a lot of hard work in my youth. Sometimes, you have to be ready for unexpected situations to do what's right, like protecting a young girl. I'd like to think that if someone had stepped in to help me, they would have done the same for my daughter. Let go of my hand and back off, old timer, he snarled at me. She's old enough to handle herself if she wants to. I let go of his hand, but with my other hand I held his head tightly and slammed it hard against the wall next to the door. The impact was strong enough to crack the drywall, which apparently stunned him. Suddenly his confidence seemed to wane and he loosened his grip on the girl. It seemed like he didn't want to make things worse. The noise in the club died down as people noticed what was going on. As soon as I started taking Alicia back to the bachelorette party, Katie and the rest of our group came up to us, took the woman by the hands and escorted her back to the table. I found myself face to face with the restaurant manager and other employees, worried that I might get in trouble. To my surprise, the manager thanked me for helping the young woman. The police have been contacted. They're taking her into custody. They'll probably ask for your details and your version of events, but I don't think you have anything to worry about. Also, your drinks for the rest of the evening are on the house. Thanks again. Wanda, the bride-to-be, said, "Wow, that was quite the ordeal." It's easy to lose track of 14 girls in a bar if you're not a professional security guard or a dad. Dads tend to have what I like to call dad vision. I chatted with the ladies at the table until they decided to move elsewhere for the rest of their evening. I gave Kathy a quick kiss and saved her contact information in my phone. "Find a private space," one of the girls joked, which got a laugh from the group as I watched the women leave. I went back to my original spot at the bar with my drink. The bartender said, "It looks like things went well for you." I told him, who would have thought a bachelorette party would be so much fun? Before I left, I replied with a laugh. Sean, the bartender, got a generous $20 tip for the evening. Kathy wore a light blue dress for the wedding, so I wore my dark blue pinstripe suit, which I consider my own room attire. We looked quite dashing, much to the approval of several people. A lot of her relatives were pleased with me throughout the wedding. Lots of people came up to me to thank me for looking after Alicia. It seemed like the bride had been telling people about what I did for her. She said I was like a hero and a handsome guy. What a great combination. Kathy's sister Donna Fulham, who is the mother of the bride, came over to us before the ceremony. She thanked us for helping the girls a few weeks ago and for helping my sister find a good man. I also got to meet Kathy's 24-year-old. A year. I also met Marissa and her fiancé Ben, who was there with his future mother-in-law. Marissa said, "Well, at least one of my parents isn't searching for dates at an elementary school." She added, "If you stick around long enough to meet my dad, he's definitely not going to like you by the end of the reception." I was confident that Kathy and I had a future together. I introduced her to my children a month later. My son quickly warmed up to her, but my daughter remained somewhat distant. She had some resentment towards me for divorcing her mother, despite her mother not having cheated on me. However, my son understood the situation. We had a good chat about fidelity and its importance to each of us, given the situation and with his own serious girlfriend. A few years back, my wife Kathy and I retired to mark for our 25th anniversary. We went on an Alaskan cruise using a daily chalice and astroglide. We make sure we have some quality time together every morning before we start the day. At this stage in our lives, it's more about fostering a connection than purely physical intimacy. All 3 of our children have tied the knot and are doing really well, blessing us with a total of 6 grandchildren. I've only had the odd conversation with my ex. My wife and I have kept in touch since our divorce, mostly during our children's weddings and holiday gatherings. She's since remarried and divorced again, often blaming me for her circumstances. She never strayed during our marriage. She often tells our children that some individuals simply failed to comprehend that's the end of the story. This is a fascinating story about the importance of self. Bob's story shows us how to handle life changes. He talks about his own experiences and observations, which make us think about loyalty, family relationships, and personal happiness.